I wanted to start it off by making a confession. But before I make a confession, I wanted you all to make a little confession with me. I hope that's okay. A quick show of hands in the past, if you ever faced with doing accessibility testing. Not a lot. Did you face any issues with automating for accessibility? Not a lot, okay. There's some yeses and some nots, that's great. In the past, have you faced issues with having accessibility testing on your CI pipelines? So these are some of the things that you should think about. But that is not my confession. My confession is this. I've been a tester, open source contributor. I'm playing a role of developer advocacy right now. And I've been talking about accessibility for over 8 to 10 years now. The first talk that I gave about accessibility was in 2013. And since then, it's actually been doing more harm than good. So I'm here to change that perception, right? I'm going to give you a complete perception about accessibility testing is not just a checklist. It's about the mindset. It's about making the digital ecosystem more inclusive and equitable for everyone. So thank you for joining me here. Let's dive in to today's topic about the guide for accessibility testing. So I have 3 parts today. The first one, I want to jump in quickly about the accessibility basics. I saw not many hands raising up when I asked about accessibility testing, so hopefully this gives you a good primer about what is accessibility testing. And then the second one is about human-centered SDLC, like human-centered software development lifecycle. You probably would have heard about TDD, BDD, or empathy-driven development. That's a new term that's coming up. So we're going to talk about human-centered SDLC. And then I have something called the testing for accessibility, right? So in my slide, you would have seen I mentioned about A11Y, ALI. We call it ALI. So the short term for accessibility is ALI, meaning if you count the characters of alphabets, which is accessibility, that's 13 characters. So if you keep the A and Y and add ones, that's 11 characters. So that's why we call it ALI. So in my slides, if I refer to ALI, that's nothing but accessibility. I think similarly goes with observability as well. We call it O11Y. I want to start off giving a perception about this picture. So take a deep look. I hope this sets up the tone for my talk and gives you a meaning. Clearing a path for people with special needs clears the path for everyone. Simple as that. And that's the perception should be for every one of us here, no matter whatever role we are playing, whether you're a product owner, whether you're a developer, whether you're a tester, right? This perception is what we need when we especially think about creating an inclusive and an equitable place. Especially we talk about digital transformation, digital excellence, and all of those aspects. Now, how about this picture? It's all about perception, right? So probably the architect, when he or she designed the stairs, not thought about having an inclusive space. The picture on the right that shows you a more inclusive way of including people with some form of disability. Yeah, does that resonate with you? Great. So we have about 15% of the world's population with some form of disabilities. Do you imagine? That's about 1 people. And especially in Europe alone, we have about 120 million people with some form of disabilities. So you're missing out a lot of business if your digital experience is not inclusive. So think about from that perspective as well, if you're not too keen on digital inclusiveness, right? So don't wait for getting sued. There are a lot of cases that happen in the digital space. And those are some of the examples that you can see where companies have sued for millions and millions just because your application is not accessible. And a lot of countries are making it as a fundamental right. Like you can see, European Accessibility Act is there. Like similarly, in the US, in the UK, and Australia, a lot of countries making this a mandate. So it's becoming more serious than ever. So when we talk about disability, it's not only about permanent disability, right? So there are permanent disability, there are temporal, and there are situational. Like how about you got your arm hurt? So you have to access your application, mobile phones in one hand. Maybe you're a new dad or a new mom. You're having a baby in one hand. You're trying to access everything in one hand. So that also relates equal to being some form of temporary disablement, right? So this is from Microsoft Inclusive Kit that shows a different persona spectrum of how you should think about developing applications. So there are different persona spectrum. It's not just about permanent disability, right? So disability is not only about physical condition. It's about making aware of the limited human interaction and giving them a way to include them, right? And taking that example from the real world where you saw the stairs and the ramp, if you're developing your applications and not making ways to being accessible, you're creating barriers and making their impairment a disability. So there's a huge difference between the word impairment and disability. So some people take it very serious when we talk about disabled. Oh, he's a disabled person. No, that's not a way to mention them, right? So impairment will be a lot better word. So try to understand there's a difference between an impairment and a disability. So now coming back to the foundations of accessibility. OK, that's enough, Manoj. I understand what about accessibility. Now tell me, how can I make my applications accessible? Well, there is a group called W3C, which most of you know. So the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, they form a group called Web Accessibility Initiative, which is WAI. And then they have formed a set of guidelines, which is right now at version 2.2 and 2.3. So that gives you a good perspective of how you should create your applications with certain guidelines. So that guidelines are nothing but, as you see down below, which are following the concept POUR, P-O-U-R. Meaning you should create your applications that is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Now, each of these principles has further criteria. Like you have level 1, level 2, and then level 3. So like each levels define some level of accessibility. So if your applications is, say, my goal is to target basic level of accessibility, because that's good enough when you're starting your accessibility journey, then you will be at level 1 and then level 2. And level 3 is the golden standard, where you try to achieve the highest possible level of accessibility that ever has formed. Now, imagine the POUR concepts and the levels. So each of them has separate criteria to fulfill, which is where the checklist mindset coming in from. So it's not only about the checklist, right? So this is one of the guidelines, as they say. So there's a difference between, again, a guideline and a checklist. So for how can I make my application more perceivable? Well, you can look at things like text alternatives. So when you're having an image, you should be able to give you a text alternative so that when they're using screen readers, navigating to your application, so for a person who is not able to see, they will use screen readers. So having text alternatives will give a good view about what that picture is, even though they're not able to see. So that's one example. So likewise, there are multiple things. For example, in operable, you have keyboard accessible. So this could be a takeaway exercise. If you're using mouse and a keyboard, so plug off your mouse and try to use your application just by keyboard. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or put a public feedback anywhere. Are you able to continue your journey? Be it logging in your application, being it putting your product in a cart or buying a product. So use this journey, whatever functional flow of your application, with just the keyboard. That's one way of checking. Mostly 70–80% of the times, you'll not be able to move, because that's an example of a bad accessibility. And that's how you should start by approaching accessibility. Now, that's good examples. Now, how do I include this into my software development lifecycle? Well, like how we say quality is everyone's responsibility, I would like to say accessibility is everyone's responsibility, because we are trying to make a place inclusive for everyone, right? And it's even better, the role, whatever you play, it starts with you. Being a QA or a product owner or a designer, for example. We have Samya who talked about the importance of UX testing strategies, right? So it's important, no matter whatever stage you are in, it makes sense to start. So usually it starts with analysis and planning phase, right? So in analysis phase, what you can do? So you can start off by understanding the legal risk. So think about what sort of product you're trying to build. And think about, you remember the government laws that I showed you. Yes, you should be abiding by that, so you should think about it. So it'll help you strengthen your brand presence. And then, so the inclusive design practices should be advocated within teams right from the beginning. So the level of achievements in accessibility that I showed you, level 1, 2, 3. So this is a very good time to discuss when you're starting. So you can't do it afterthought, like most likely now it will be an afterthought, because if you're starting a greenfield project, which is at a very early phase, you could always talk about what level we are trying to achieve. Most likely, they will start with level 1 and then have a goal. OK, level 2 is great. So in most experiences, like I've been doing accessibility for over a decade, and I've seen most companies strive to reach level 2, which is AA. Like you have A, AA, and AAA, which you saw in the structure of WCAG. So AA is most likely what? So government organizations, they strive to achieve for AAA. And that's how, the different levels. And of course, if you are aiming for AAA, that's well and good as well. And that's what the last point means here. So at a design phase, which is very important, right? So it is good to start as early as possible when you're trying to decide how your UX prototype should look like, right? And I don't know how many of you heard about GEL. So GEL is a global experience language. You can search about GEL, BBC, Atlassian. So they all have a design guidelines that said anyone can use that. Like gov.uk is the best example. os.gov.au is a good example. So a lot of good examples that we have in accessibility. So defining color contrast. Like for example, the theme for Who Stuff is blue and white, right? So that is a good example for selecting a good color contrast. So likewise, when you decide colors for your brand, your theme, you should look at, will the colorblind people able to perceive without any difficulty? And that's something, because there is a lot of color combinations. We all studied in schools, right? You can mix red versus green with white. You come up with different color combinations. And of course, you have to conduct usability testing outside your organization. So at the development phase, so go and talk to your developers to ask them to develop what works for them, but what is making meaning to people, right? And that's what is very, very important. And conduct workshops and try to understand what is the focus order. Like as I mentioned, a key exercise for you to do when you go back home or on the weekend, plug your mouse, try to access via keyboard. If you're not able to do that, and that's what they want to focus on, focus order. So focus order is very, very important that all the developers should focus on so that they know how to make their applications accessible. For someone with one arm, maybe, I can use it in keyboard alone. So either I have to use the left arm for both mouse and keyboard. It's making it less accessible. So what if I don't have a mouse? Can I try to access with keyboard? So that's one example, as I mentioned earlier. And using ARIA. So ARIA is nothing but similar to HTML. So those were, again, found by the same set of W3C people who found the WAI. So they defined a couple of tags that will help you make your web applications more accessible. So then people started using, OK, I have ARIA attributes. I will use in my DOM tree, and I'll make my web application accessible. No. Right? So just because some ARIA attributes is available, you can't use them to make it accessible. You should make use of them very judiciously. And that's what's very important. Most importantly, at testing phase, you should consider people with some form of impairments or disabilities for user testing. And that is very, very important. Automated testing is not the only solution. Of course, it makes you help reach some stage. Rather than you being at level 0, you'll be reaching at least level 4 or 5 out of 10. That's like 40, 50%. So automated accessibility testing tools that are available in the market right now will help you achieve at least 40, 50%. So which is better than nothing, right? So as a testers, as a QAs, as an automation, whatever role you play, you could look forward to achieving that 40, 50%. That itself will give you a lot of ways to make your application more accessible. And you should consider adding accessibility test as part of your build. Build meaning it's a CI build. That's why I asked you earlier when I introduced, have you come across a task of putting accessibility as part of your pipeline? That will be interesting. And of course, use screen readers. Now, double-clicking on testing, because that's what's more important. We just saw how you can do accessibility at planning, design, testing. And now we're double-clicking on testing and seeing a little more details on what we could do. So disclaimer, there is no substitute for real user feedback, and you could include people with some form of disabilities to test your applications. All the technology and tools will help you reach some stage, but it won't do the job completely for you. So in accessibility testing, there are two things that you could do. One is a formative testing, and one being a summative testing. So summative testing is usually at the end, where you have some agencies which will do an exhaustive testing of your application and will give you a certificate. And that certificate is mostly useful when you're getting sued, for example. We say, hey, we have a certificate. Like they have something called VPAT. It's called VPAT. So organizations get VPAT certifications to make sure they are certified of being accessible in whatever level they want to achieve. In most of the websites, if you see, at the bottom, wherever the sitemap is, you will see an accessibility statement. So try to click on that link and see what that accessibility statement means. And that will give you a lot of view. And where we could focus on, and what I'm going to show you next, is mostly on the formative testing, where whatever is within your control, like you develop your applications, you test your applications, so you have a lot of control to make it a little better than being it worse. So you don't want an external agency to come and certify your application saying that's 0% accessible. Then your leadership will jump from top to bottom and say, hey, we want to revamp everything. What if the major decision will come back and say, the color is not visible, right? So a lot of things could happen. So imagine you're going production on live, and the feedback is it's not accessible by people with some form of color blindness. So you have to go back and change the entire color, which means a lot because you're changing a lot of things from a branding perspective. So a lot of things like that could happen. So what else you can test for? Well, you can test for keyboard navigation, landmarks, form labels. These are some of the things that you will fiddle with doing web applications. So likewise, there are things like touch target size for mobile applications. So that's why in mobile devices, we see if you go to accessibility in iPhone or Android, you have option to increase the size. Because sometimes, I'm sure most of you would face this. Like, for example, you try to click on a button in phone, and it will not work. Sometimes you adjust and click right in the center of the middle, and it will work. So that's what the touch target size means. So that also means a lot when you're trying to develop mobile applications, how much touch target size we are giving, no matter like if the same application is opened in iPad or in MacBook or a tablet or a phone, the touch target size may vary. And that also matters a lot, and that gives you a lot of perception. People might think, oh, I tried clicking, it doesn't work, so I'm moving to another vendor with similar services. There could be a lot of business impact as well. And test with assistive devices, and that's more important because assistive devices here meaning the screen readers. So there are a lot of free open source tools that you can do. So in Mac, for those of you who are using MacBook, they have an inbuilt tool called VoiceOver. So you can start your VoiceOver and tab through your application and see what it reads out. If it's not reading out meaningful, you don't want the screen reader to read out saying HTML, input tag, dev tag. That's what it'll use to say. It will not make sense to people with some form of disabilities, right? For people who can't see, who can only hear, for them it will be tough to make sense what's going on. So that's where testing with assistive devices really mean. Now, putting everything into context, well, there are different test pyramids. There are trophy model, diamond model. I'm not here to debate on which model works for you. Well, whatever works for you, you can fit in with the idea, right? So from a bottom level, you can start with static checks and then unit tests. So there are different tools available, like starting from like Storybook. When you design prototype, you can test using some tools up until the UI end-to-end layer, which starts with Selenium, Cypress, or Playwright. All these tools have some form of integration with open source tools that you could test for. Also, some plugins in browsers, which will help you to quickly do. So if you're doing exploratory testing a lot, and if you wanted to quickly check, and that's something that you can do by using plugins. So the plugins will easily give you how a colorblind person will view web application. Maybe a button is visible for you. When you change mode, it might not visible. So that's a bug. It's a huge bug. So people with some form of color blindness will not be able to see. That's how you should perceive, look forward to do some sort of exploratory testing. So again, the initial question that I asked you, accessibility testing in a CI pipeline. So this is something that we as a team achieved in 2017 when I was working with an insurance client called IAG. So if you can Google about Coles group getting sued for millions of money. So we panicked. Coles is part of a other portfolio company, so we started again making our applications more accessible. And it took nearly about 9 months to achieve this. So this gives you from a concept meaning what is the feature we want to develop. Like that's when you can begin by accepting, starting to accept this is my acceptance criteria. So you can start having accessibility guidelines within your acceptance criteria. up until what you can do when you deploy to production or disaster recovery. So how can I make this possible? Well, I have an open source repository that I open sourced. So if you're using JavaScript and WebDriver IO, I have this repository which is open source. You can try it out. So easily with that, you can include it in your CI build. If you say, I'm not using WebDriver IO, I need something else, then that's something that you can try out. Well, there are some common list of issues that you need to take care. You can take a snap. I know some of you are trying to snaps. So if you make sure your application is not having this, you're 90% done. That's a big statistics that was developed. With that, in the pursuit of digital excellence, accessibility is not an option. It's an obligation from our side to bridge the more inclusive and digital realm. Thank you for joining me here. There are multiple sessions, and you chose to be here, which means you've already taken a good step before making this place a more inclusive. And thank you, everyone. My name is Manoj Kumar. Up for any questions.
Lovely job. Almost perfect timing. Almost just perfect. OK, what is the most popular but not accessible software that you know?
That's an interesting question. I don't want to defame them, but I can give you a couple of examples who were worst, but they made themselves better. For example, eBay was worst. Amazon was not accessible. A lot of government organizations, like, for example, something to speak with government organizations, to create some sort of forms, or even insurance applications, the calls, the examples that I gave you. So these are some of the popular tools that are not accessible. Oh, even Facebook, I found them to be worse, but I don't know if they have improved a lot. Maybe you go and check it out.
OK, what do you think is the biggest blocker to improving accessibility?
It's a mindset. People put it as an afterthought process. That's one of the things. So if you try to educate them knowing about accessibility or why accessibility is important, I think the changes will start from there. So even when I started about accessibility, I told you my story. So we started accessibility when we heard our competitor was sued. So I'm saying, don't wait for that. You can use that examples to showcase this could happen to us anytime. And this is as per the fundamental government law. So maybe we should look at that and start advocating for accessible applications. And don't wait for suit. Let's start developing applications and make it accessible.
OK. Is it realistically possible to reach AAA with a more than 20-year-old software? Or should you be happy with a simple A?
That's an interesting question as well. Well, I would say something is better than nothing. So I know legacy applications are very, very hard to make them accessible. But I would say if you're thinking about it making accessible with level A, that's a huge achievement. I would definitely give a big round of applause if you're thinking in that way. Because once you reach AA, like A, you will automatically reach AA. Like, for example, I'm a runner. I used to run 10K. So my best time is 63 now. So maybe my next target is to finish within 50 minutes. So that's what I'm aiming. So likewise, if you aim for being A, I believe you will automatically aim for getting AA in the future.
OK, I hope I'm going to say this well. How do you introduce A11Y testing in a company where it was not a focus and determined as non-profitable?
Yeah, I mean, I partly covered this in my talk. Well, it's not about profitable, right? So you could make it a profitable discussion if that's what the goal is. For example, I showed you how much percentage of people are disabled. So you can go and ask them, don't want these people to access your application? Or you can do a proof of check with your competitor if there is in your space, and show them, hey, this application is accessible. He's a competitor. So this much amount of population might use this application. So do we want to miss out on that? Let's not wait for that, and let's start making our applications more accessible so that we don't lose on them. And in most of the cases, I believe only a few people get a chance to work from a project which is greenfield from the scratch, which can fit in this DLC phases. For those of you who are in a brownfield, like like it's reached some stage of development or it's a legacy application, it'll be quite hard to change everything from the scratch. But I think you can make small changes at a time. Like for example, use tools that I showed in the test pyramid at a UI level or a unit testing level, because that is an easy piece of cake, right? It can easily work. You don't need much of an effort. So you can do the changes and see, is this too much of an effort? Right? Talk to your developers. Right? So first stage of conversation will be with them, and then collaboratively as a team, we should do. Like Rome was not built in a single day, as they say, so it should be with the team effort.
Okay, I think one more. Which screen reader tool do you use for your tests? JAWS?
Yeah, JAWS is one good one, and there's also something called NVIDIA for Windows, and for Mac you have VoiceOver. So there are different out tools, but you are right. Whoever you asked, like it could be JAWS, it could be NVIDIA, and for Mac we have VoiceOver and various different paid tools as well, which gives you a little more than what these free tools can give you.
That was really brilliant. Thank you so much, Manoj. Can I please have one more big applause?
Thank you for joining.